So I'll be introducing Mark O'Brien, our keynote speaker. We're lucky enough to have him today. Mark is the co-founder and executive director of ProBono.net. For those of you who were here for the last panel, Claudia Colinas-Johnson was the Law Help Interactive program director, a project of ProBono.net. And ProBono.net is a national nonprofit that increases access to justice for the poor and other vulnerable populations through innovative uses of technology, collaboration, and volunteer mobilization. It was founded in 1998, and it builds web platforms to support public interest lawyers. It builds broad-based justice partnerships and empowers people in need to solve their legal problems. Prior to starting ProBono.net, Mark spent 8 years building a nationally recognized pro bono program at Davis Polk. And he has served on the advisory boards of the University of Pennsylvania Law School's public service program. And he's a member of the Pro Bono and Legal Services Committee of the New York City Bar and of Chief Judge Jonathan Lipman's Committee on Non-Lawyers in the Justice Gap. And he's currently an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown, Georgetown University Law Center, where he co-teaches the Technology, Innovation, and Law Practice Practicum. And Mark was named a 2012 Fast Case 50 honoree for his contributions to the legal technology field. So we're very honored to have him here. Please join me in giving him a round of applause.
Great. Well, thanks very much to the students who organized the conference, to Arlene Finkelstein and her colleagues for inviting me here. I feel a little bit like, bringing coals to Newcastle after the last panel of people who had great things to say about the sphere in which I work. And I'll try not to go over too much repeat ground with them. It's particularly nice for me to be back here. The one part of my bio you didn't mention is that I am actually a Penn undergraduate degree, is where I got my degree. So it's nice to be back here in official capacity, although I actually come back here quite a bit. My wife and I, we met when we were undergrads, and then after undergrad, when I lived a life as a struggling actor for years in Philadelphia, I worked across the street at the then La Terrace, for some of you, the older folks in the room. Was a bartender for years, yeah. Drinking with Vartan Gregorian and others, those were the days. Judy Wicks ran it then. So I do come back here quite a bit, and in fact, my wife's father is a life professor at the university, and when I first, he's at the Wistar Institute, and when I first got the invitation here, my first thought that I was very excited about was I thought, oh my God, I can actually give a talk, have him come here, and he will understand what I do. But then you heard a lot about what I do from the people before me, and I figured that wouldn't be that interesting a topic for you. So instead, I figured I would talk a little bit about, why I do what I do. Why is it that somebody whose work in the field of law as a non-lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, is rooted in a belief that there is a relevance to the law in vindicating the rights and improving the lives on a day-to-day basis of low-income people and other vulnerable populations. Why would I choose to engage with technology? And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm also not a technologist. I'm kind of like that old, again, dating myself, where there was that, if you're ever in New York when I was growing up, where there was a men's clothing store called Sims, and I think their tagline was, "An educated consumer is our best customer." So I consider myself an educated consumer of law and an educated consumer of technology. My interest in technology is really rooted not so much in a fascination with the coding and the how and you do it, but in its potential to be a vehicle for collaboration and a potential be a vehicle to conduct the practice of law and think about the role of law in a way that is actually much more rooted in the needs of the users and in the problems of the people that we're trying to solve, which has very often a very strong legal dimension to it, but also has other dimensions to it as well. And so the opportunities that we find, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in detail, the opportunity that we found through these technology projects to build broad-based collaborations with other justice actors, ranging from other institutions like public libraries, like social workers, like community colleges, like constituent services offices of local government, but also to think about engaging community members and other non-legal community-based organizations who, at the end of the day, notwithstanding the need for lawyers to intervene at certain times in people's lives to help them with specific problems, it's connected to those other community actors that are really going to determine on a day-to-day basis the ability of people in their daily lives to experience justice in this country. And I think a lot recently about the whole concept of legal empowerment. It's not something that at legal services conferences in the US, you talk that much about. It is a concept that in the developing world is, I think, very much in interest. And it's really the idea of legal empowerment, and I'll read a definition of it from the Open Society Foundation's. Legal empowerment is about strengthening the capacity of all people to exercise their rights, either as individuals or as members of a community. It's about ensuring that law is available and meaningful to ordinary people. And I think, hopefully, just from what you heard in the last panel, the approach that many in the public interest legal community who are using technology is very much rooted in that idea and thinking about how do we make information about rights and then tools that would allow people to engage in improving their own situation and access help of the appropriate kind to be successful is connected to that idea about making, notwithstanding issues around the digital divide, which are very real today, as they were just slightly different maybe than what they were a decade ago. The excitement for me around the field of technology and law is really that opportunity to think about opening up access and opening up tools to a much broader group of people. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a great agency, has a very interesting, they've obviously done work for years in the area of financial literacy and financial education, and increasingly have been promoting this idea of financial empowerment, which they have, I often use a slide of it, which I don't have here today, but basically looks at the connection between information and literacy, plus tools that allow people to take action, would constitute for them the idea of financial empowerment. And it's something that I think for people who are practicing law and thinking about their role in helping to deliver justice in community, not just to accomplish specific legal tasks, think about where there are opportunities in the work that you've heard about in the session before for those tools and those services to help move forward this idea of a legal empowerment. So I think my own sort of journey in this field has been very much then rooted in sort of looking at not what's the latest and greatest and cutting edge in technology, but what is appropriate technology for the challenges that we're trying to solve. And the early part, as was said, I came out of being in a big law firm and running a pro bono program there, and had done a lot of pro bono work, particularly in the area of asylum and immigration law. And my initial interest in kind of how technology in the first instance could be used to better connect lawyers and share knowledge amongst legal professionals came very much out of the challenges that I felt in trying to do that work. And the opaqueness from somebody who wasn't part of the public interest community in understanding how to connect and understand who all the organizations were and how we could work with them. And so as I worked in a law firm that had, very good cutting-edge technology and very smart people thinking about how it would change the practice of our firm, gave me a position to think about not how would you use technology to create resources for one organization, but how could you use technology to create kind of shared platforms that would create incentives to bring different actors from different part of the legal community in and share their content and their expertise with each other. Very often it's sort of moments of emergent need that make you realize why the regular way of going to thinking about increasing justice, sort of individual organization mission by individual organization mission at a time doesn't work, is in those moments of crisis. And one small moment of crisis that kind of led myself and my partner who started Pro Bono Net together was our experience working, as I said, in political asylum area at an incident that happened in the early 90s in New York, where there was a ship. Some of you may be familiar with the Golden Venture. Does the Golden Venture mean anything to anybody? So the Golden Venture was a freighter ship that ran aground off of Queens, Far Rockaway in New York, and there were 240 Chinese nationals on that ship. And it was a couple of hundred yards or less offshore. The boat sank. People swam, some drowned, some were saved out of the water, some made it up onto the shore, and walked a few feet before they were taken into custody. And the question of whether they were taken into custody by a New York City police officer or by a federal person, back in what we might now think of as kind of like a golden age of immigration law in the United States, where there were actual remedies for people who entered the country illegally. All of those things kind of mattered and depended on determined what their rights were to claim asylum. And it was really a moment where these 240 people kind of overwhelmed the system. It overwhelmed the capacity of the pro bono community. At that point, there was one organization in New York. It was then called the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, still around, Human Rights First, great organization. But their business model was like, okay, we're going to do 75 cases a year. There was lots of interest from different parts of the bar in getting involved and helping there, but very little expertise in this area. And so this was just a concrete example of where this sudden moment, all of the normal channels of thinking about how do we organize and how do we best deliver services kind of didn't work in a moment where the problem that we were trying to solve was defined by something other than what our daily tasks were. And I remember at that time, all the big law firms ended up taking cases, and this was pre-internet age, early 90s. And so for some reason, even though we all had nice conference rooms and telephones then, we would go down to Catholic churches in the Lower East Side to take part in huge conference calls, and we would fax chain each other. And it was the nature of these cases, because it really overwhelmed the system so much that even all of the government couldn't house all these detainees in one place. So they sent them out all around the country. And it suddenly became this moment of how would we share information and knowledge amongst lawyers handling cases that were all virtually the same. And all of the traditional models that we had for how to approach the work and collaboration didn't have any meaning in that moment. And that experience and others then led me to think about, where technology could play a role here. And in the first instance, it was focused around sharing knowledge and increasing the number of lawyers from the private bar and making it easier for them to get involved. And over the years, our work, as you've heard from what my colleague Claudia Johnson talked about, our work around Law Help Interactive, our work in the immigration sector, which we do in collaboration with the Immigration Advocates Network, has been more and more focused on a move into thinking about the role of legal technology and online information for consumer needs, and building a bridge then between those consumer systems and thinking about what are new models for service delivery that are enabled I think that it is not just a question of, there's often a concern that the moment we start thinking about putting resources online, that it's only thinking about either providing people help or providing them with technology. And I think some of the most exciting work that's going on is thinking about how, with the availability of these online tools, you can think about new models of service delivery that allow, and we have collaborations going in the immigration sector, for instance, that allow people who need assistance on DACA petitions, for instance, for deferred action, young dreamers, or people needing help navigating the citizenship process, can be working with community-based organizations in remote areas that don't have native legal capacity. They can be using some of the legal expert system and online forms that Claudia talked about to better understand and participate in the preparation of their applications, and then have a video conference consultation with a lawyer who's coming in to assist from afar, who can't be in that remote location. So I think that it's very much the idea of using technology and using appropriate technology is thinking about what are the specific challenges, and typically when we talk about the challenges of broadening access to justice, obviously resources and money, the lack of funding for this work is clearly true and huge barrier. But on the day-to-day basis, the barriers that keep poor people have to do not just with that, the lack of funding for legal services, but it has to do, as we heard in the panel before, with a lack of understanding necessarily that legal help is what they need. It has to do with barriers of geography. We work in states like New York, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, but also in places like Montana, where the catchment district for Montana legal services, I'd have to leave my home in Brooklyn and drive to Chicago to cover the catchment district. So it's not surprising that it's places like Montana that were some of the early adopters to think about, well, what should we be trying to move online? And then once we have information available online, how could the legal aid community be like Land's End? When people come to our website and find information and they can't figure out, do they want the Irish knit wool or do they want the other wool? They can just click on a button and someone's not going to knit them a sweater out of chain mail, but they are going to help them find what they're looking for and connect them to what they need next. Why couldn't the legal aid community do that? Now, it's not a problem of technology. The technology is trivial. It's actually about, well, where would the human capacity lie in art? Where does it lie? Who would do that work? How would we, Richard Granite talked about sort of business process improvement and legal process management. It's really thinking through, and we see our work not just as about developing technology tools and developing apps. My partner I started Pro Bono Net with, on the occasion of our 10th anniversary, came up with a great slogan where he said, Pro Bono Net, building access to justice, one app at a time. He's now the head of a global marketing and business development at a global law firm, and I'm like, holding the bag at Pro Bono Net. There's different skills. But I heard that, and I thought, oh, that's a great thing. And then I said to myself, actually, even if apps had been around, we would never have called ourselves Pro Bono App. We're Pro Bono Net because that idea of the network both relates to the technology, but it also relates to the network of human beings, individuals who need to be empowered by this technology in order for it to have any relevance. And the journey that we see ourselves on, like colleagues at Illinois Legal Aid Online and elsewhere, is really in thinking through, how do we harness these technologies and make them relevant, not just to the work and the way that we imagine people doing and providing legal assistance 10 years from now, but how they're doing it today, and how do we go on them with a journey to modify the technology, modify the way we think about delivering our services, modify the way we think about who are the other actors. One of the very exciting things in our immigration work has been the opportunity in working with young dreamer networks over the last couple of years around DACA, where we worked with United We Dream, which is the largest network of youth immigrant rights advocates. And we really saw in making We Own the Dream, which is the website where you can go and prepare, figure out whether you're eligible, and Pocket DACA, which is the companion mobile app. And it had tremendous uptake very quickly. We had, like, in the first couple of months, 25,000 people downloaded it and used it to figure out whether they were eligible and get connected to legal services. And we assumed, oh, that's because we're partnering with all the right people. And that was true. And their networks helped get the word out there. But then we did polling on the app, and we found out that only a very small percentage of the people who got the app knew about any local organization that was youth immigrant rights organizations. And it confirmed for us a thought about where the opportunity is in using technology, not in that case just to think about how do we deliver services more effectively and scale, but how do we partner with organizations who, in our work together around that, is actually going to help them in their base building, help them when we think about what will likely happen over the next couple of years if there is, as the Obama administration promises, some form of wide-scale. I can't speak anymore, my time's up, but I'm going to finish this thought. If there's some sort of wide-scale administrative relief, or, knock wood, in due course, some sort of large-scale legalization programs, it's clear to me that the legal services community is going to need to think about harnessing technologies and harnessing partnerships in order to do its bit and be effective in the extremely important work of helping people apply and get that benefit. But for those people who get that benefit, to stay on the path and be successful in their lives and to, keep with all the things that they'll need to do to be eligible if that legalization comes, it's not going to be the help of lawyers that's going to be critical to them. It's going to be the help of all those other community actors. And so how do we think about using the technology? And this ties to one of the comments that Claudia made about the importance of outreach and marketing for these products. Whose hands do we put those products and services in? And at whose service do we put them, so that we can think about the moment of, what if the moment of serving and helping with applying for administrative relief or applying for legalization for 100,000 people in Texas, what if that moment became also a moment for local community-based low-wage worker organizing groups, housing advocates, to build their membership base in that same moment by thousands? In terms of what the long-term impact of the work and where the opportunity is strategically in thinking about why technology is so important and how we think through not just how we do what we do, but why we do what we do. I think in the long run, the impact in the measure is going to be in using these tools and the legal know-how of lawyers who are committed to this work to strengthen those other community actors and make them more relevant in being involved in solving the needs of their neighbors is going to have a much greater impact than the number of downloads and hits and applications that we delivered in that moment, even though I think those things are pretty important. So I will wrap up. I think there'll be time for questions. And the one thing that I would ask those of you who are students here, not as many as I expected, I didn't ask my father-in-law to come here and understand what I do. I have Thanksgiving is coming up, and I have an opportunity for yet another year to try and explain to him what I do at Thanksgiving. So if you're going across the campus and there's a elderly, distinguished 90-year-old life professor walking towards the Wistar Institute, and you see him, ask him how I did at Thanksgiving, and no matter what he tells you, ask him to have faith for one more year that it's all worthwhile. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. O'Brien. And as somebody who's interested in technology, but who also worked in and came to law school to do immigrants' rights, this was very inspiring for me to hear. So we have time now for Q&A. So we have 2 people with mics going around, so feel free to raise your hand, and Mr. O'Brien will be here to answer any questions.
Well, Mark will be anyway. I don't know about Mr. O'Brien. My father didn't come. But. Well, the service that I was talking about, which was that chat service, we actually introduced that with Montana Legal Services on the Law Help, and many of the statewide websites now use it. It's a service called Live Help. In my home state in New York, law students actually person Live Help, 7 days a week, all hours of the day. In English or in Spanish, you can click on a button and connect to a law student who is not going to answer your legal problem, but is going to help you navigate. We think of them as navigators. In other states, where they don't have as many law schools, in Iowa, which was, along with Montana, one of the other states that we first introduced this service. Illinois also does the law student model. In Iowa, they said, well, who do we have in our, well, we've got a hotline. So, we heard before different pathways. All right, this can be another pathway to our hotline. In Montana, they actually decided they were going to have every single person in the organization, from the executive director to the intake staff to the administrative staff, we're all going to take shifts on answering questions from Live Help, because they saw it as an opportunity to actually understand better what people needed. And they implemented a sort of parallel system, a chat system within their offices, so that if someone was asked a question and they didn't know how to answer it, they were able to chat one of their colleagues and find out. And in Texas, actually, where we introduced Live Help in the aftermath of one of the hurricanes, and surprisingly, with all the ways in which Texas is sometimes not the most friendly place for legal innovations, certainly not in the online forms area, but they actually used lawyers. They first used it to make, for people who were at Red Cross shelters and other places who could get access to a terminal, it allowed them to have a web chat with an attorney, and they've kept that model. And they now operate it as a chat service, but then it can go to a chat to a call service, and they have 2 full-time attorneys who provide brief services to people using that. This past week, Veterans Week, they actually they expanded it, and they brought on volunteer attorneys, and veterans could go to Texas Law Help and chat in their questions and be connected with attorneys. So that's just, it's not going to get the cable knit sweater made, but it'll take part of the customer service part of what I was talking about. The brand, that's a good question. We think Law Help's a pretty good brand. It is a challenge. People go to Google first, but the work that needs to be done to make sure that, a reputable source of information. I'm happy to say, if you search for, you can try it. If you search for, some sort of poverty law area of need in Illinois, I'm pretty sure Illinois Legal Aid Online is going to be up at the top. I'm pretty sure in other states, Law Help will come up at the top of the list. But I think, and in some ways, wait, I'll answer another question, and I'll digress if nobody has any other questions. Mm-hmm. Right, that's definitely true. I would say that the opportunities to scale are different, and the sort of partnership model is different. One of the reasons at this point, the largest part of what Pro Bono Net does is partnering with, sort of state justice communities in 30 to 40 states that are using our tools, and we recognize no one organization is going to be able to develop all of that content. We want to develop a common platform and then put it in the hands of local nonprofit bar partnerships that will feed that content in. And the strength was our local partnerships. In an area like immigration, we realized actually that's not the best way to do it. Let's develop a different set of relationships with some of the major national organizations that have networks that they're trying to mobilize all around the country, clearly, we have a, she's not here anymore, but I'll plug her, a Knight-funded initiative. A lot of our work in the citizenship area has been funded by the Knight Foundation, as well as Carnegie and some of the other national funders that are kind of really interested in civic engagement. We have spent the last year sort of redesigning the service model for that platform, which has been in use, and you could find it at citizenshipworks.org, to really think about creating, it's got a very robust screening interview that comes at the beginning to figure out whether someone's eligible and to catch red flags. It's somebody who doesn't throw red flags and can complete the form on their own, can print it out and use it. Somebody for whom it throws a red flag, they won't be able to print out the form and use it, but they are able to engage in making an appointment with one of our partners. And we've got partners in about 20 states who are going to both offer in-person services tied to consultations, but also online virtual services. And I think this is it's the area in some ways where all that Richard Granite was talking about comes together with all the work that we do. I think in the early days of what we were doing, it was really about using the web to network, using the web to publish. We've moved into an era where using the web for really service delivery is becoming possible. I think the next stage that we're working very hard on involves using the kinds of legal expert systems that Richard talked a little bit about to create sort of online triage, assess needs, and point someone off to the right swim lane to how they could be served. And I think that's the place where there's actually the opportunity to think about how do we not just empower the public interest legal community to do its work more effectively, but how could we create incentives for the private sector who, if they're getting referrals of over-income clients that come with that sort of robust evaluation and understanding of what the case is before they agree to take that on, will be much more likely to offer their services at fixed rates or low fee. So can we think about the work that we're doing? I think that's the really ambitious part of what we're doing, is to think about, can we, in really engaging with the public interest legal community and helping them figure out how they do their work, tee up to bring whole new groups of actors who aren't going to act on a pro bono basis. They're not going to act, they're going to act because they're looking for a way to, keep themselves going as a solo small practitioner. And the challenges really then become for us around thinking about, well, how do you validate those people? Our model will be by doing it through the trusted nonprofit partners who are engaging in the system, so that any private lawyer that operates in the system would have to be vetted through a nonprofit partner. But I think there's huge potential for thinking about using these systems to drive just more efficient and better market-driven legal services, which I heard Tom Harkin, I was down in DC the other day, Tom Harkin, who's retiring sadly after 40 years. His only job before he was in public servant was being a legal aid lawyer in Polk County, Iowa. And he was being honored by NLADA, National Legal Aid and Defender, for his lifetime of service. And he gave a very just, heartening speech. But also he said one of the statistics, which I hadn't thought of, I hadn't heard it in these terms, that really kind of was shocking. He talked about the economic recovery that we've had, since the Great Recession a few years ago. And he pointed out that 95% of the wealth that's been created since that recession has gone to 1% of the population. So forget about just, we're losing traction on the foothold, not just at the bottom of the pillar, but all the ways along, up the way. And so I think that increasingly these modes of practice, which for reasons that Richard Granite mentioned, innovation is not as likely to come from the private sector. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to think about how do we take the solutions that we're developing and use them to serve the communities more broadly. And you have 10 seconds to ask a question. I've got 20 seconds to answer it. So last one. Thanks.